So I'm sure you've all had to do some negotiating to get where you are today, and that's what we're going to explore in this next panel. In business and our everyday lives, from compensation packages to household responsibilities, what are the secrets to successful negotiation? Let's hear from the experts in a discussion with Fortune's Lee Gallagher. Please welcome Lee and our panelists.
Thank you, Colleen. It's great to be here. Time is flying so fast. Anyway, welcome. So we have with us today Vijaya Gadde, who is the General Counsel of Twitter and a member of this year's Fortune 40 Under 40, and Vicki Medvec, who is the Adeline Barry Davey Professor of Management and Organizations.
And not under 40.
That's okay. At the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, she's an amazing negotiation expert, speaker, and guru, and a regular at our Women's Summit, so some people may have seen her there. I have to say two things. First of all, we all went to Cornell, which is like really funny. We just discovered that. And also, you might notice that Vicki has a necklace on and I don't. I was asked to take it off for the microphone. Vicki negotiated. That tells you everything you need to know right there. So, Vicki, let's start with you. Tell us, and we're going to open this up. These two are going to be great at answering any questions you have, so get them ready. Tell us the biggest three negotiating mistakes or traps that people make.
So the first big mistake that people make is not to ask, and not to ask at all. And women tend to make this mistake more than men, but in fact, men make this mistake as well. So the original research that showed that women don't ask showed that a very small proportion of women, like 3%, were negotiating their packages. But the reality is that same research showed that only 47% of men were doing it. So the reality is a lot of people fail to ask, and that is the biggest mistake. And then when they ask, they don't ask for the right things. So even yesterday, when you asked a question about how many people have negotiated their salary, what I want to ask is how many people have negotiated full packages, because you should never just be negotiating your salary. It should be a much broader conversation. And I think that so often we focus on women asking for money, but we really should focus on women asking for roles and asking for position and asking for responsibility. And so I think it's important to ask for the right things and to make clear asks. So that is not to say, can you give me extra comp, or could you do something for me? I always say it's like going into the department store and you see a sweater that has a snag. If you go up to the counter and you say, can you take something off, you're not going to end up with nearly as much as if you go to the counter and say, can I have this for 50% off since it has the snag? So I always say, don't make feeble offers, make firm offers. Real offers, ask, and ask for more than one thing.
Good advice. Vijaya, you are General Counsel of Twitter now. You have a career before that as being a lawyer in the Valley for years, working for Wilson Sonsini, doing M&A, securities law, lots of other things. What is the toughest negotiation situation you found yourself in, and how did you deal with it?
Wow, the toughest. You know, I think each of them have their own challenges, and for me the toughest thing was always figuring out the strategy to take in each one, because you take a different strategy depending on the ultimate relationship you want with the person involved. And so, you know, we had a bunch of hostile takeovers in the late 2000s and 2010s, and those are continuing. And the strategy you take there is very, very different than the strategy you would take in an acquisition where you're working with the founders and you want to build really strong relationships and trust so that when they join the team, they don't feel like they've been battered and bruised in the process. So to me, it was more about that than one individual tough negotiation. It's about figuring out the right strategy based on the relationship you ultimately want.
And how, you kind of touched on it, but how are the kinds of negotiations you're doing at Twitter, and maybe even like the cultural aspect of things, how is that different? Do you have to kind of behave a little differently at Twitter because, you know, for whatever reason, the way the company culture is compared with, say, I don't know, some of the big enterprise tech companies you used to deal with?
I think that's definitely true. I heard a little bit on the earlier panel about core values and how that defines your company. And we have a great core value about communicating fearlessly to build trust at our company. And that really requires that you take a different approach. You can't kind of be like, hey, I'm the general counsel, you have to do this. That's not the approach that is convincing or that builds trust with your team. And so internally, definitely explaining and really almost convincing them to do the right thing or to do the thing that you think is the right thing. Whereas externally, you're going to take a very different approach. You can be more authoritative, whether it's negotiating with governments who are asking you to do things that you don't think are right or legal. We do that all the time. We're always in those situations, and you want to take drastically different postures in those negotiations.
You are a poker player. Does that help? Is that, do you bring the same things to the negotiating table that you bring to the poker table?
Sometimes you do want to hide what you have. But like I said, within a company, I think it's better to be transparent and to be honest about what you're trying to achieve, because you're trying to convince everyone who has the same goal, which is to make the company successful. So being transparent is actually a much better strategy, in my opinion.
And I think that's true in general in negotiation, that unlike poker, one of the goals in negotiation is to gather information, but to gather information, I have to give away some information. And so I think that information exchange is key in negotiation and not in poker.
That's definitely true.
So often, when we talk about negotiation, it's about a lot of things, but it's often about a dollar amount, whether it's your salary or whatever. In the previous panel in Defy, we were talking about asking for money. And I once talked to a friend, a male friend, and he said, when you're asking for money, if the number doesn't make you physically uncomfortable in your seat, if you aren't cringing, you're leaving money on the table, and you're not asking for enough. Is that right?
So I absolutely agree that you want to be a little uncomfortable. You want to be uncomfortable because we're so conservative in what we ask for. But while you're uncomfortable, you want to make sure that you're building a rationale for the offer. And again, you want it to be about more than just the money, but you want to build a rationale for that, and you want the rationale to focus on the other side. Because as you mentioned, the relationship almost always matters. There are very few negotiations we do where the relationship is irrelevant. We negotiate all the time in places where we're going to have to negotiate with them again, or we have reputational concerns. So we want to make sure that we make asks that are very bold, but not ridiculous. So we want to make sure we're building a rationale for the offer.
Who has a question for Vicky or Vijaya? Anyone? No. The relationship is important, but also, the facts and the data are important. But I mean, at a certain point, it's really the style and the approach as much, if not more, than the facts and the data. Is that right?
I definitely think that. You can definitely talk about all the different negotiation books and strategies, but what I found is copying one thing just didn't work for me. As a new attorney right out of law school, you look around, you see how other people are negotiating, and you're insecure when you first come out, and you're like, I'm gonna do it like that person. They seem to have it really together. And what you realize over time is you need to find your own style. You need to find what works for you. You generally have a way of approaching this without thinking about it in your interpersonal relationships with your family, with your friends, and kind of adopting what you do in real life as part of your approach, I think is what works really well, at least for me.
I completely agree. I think that the approach matters a great deal, and it actually impacts the relationship a lot, because people get this feeling of satisfaction or dissatisfaction based on how the negotiation went. But I do think that even though the process matters a lot and your whole approach matters a great deal, that sometimes people who become very, very comfortable with it make a big mistake. And that is that they don't get well enough prepared. They over-rely upon their personality or their style, and they tend not to get ready for the discussion. And I think that preparation remains key no matter how much of an expert you are in negotiation. You've got to be ready for the discussion.
Preparation meaning if it's a deal, what are comparable prices that were paid for something, or what is the person like, or what kind of
analyzing their weaknesses and really thinking about the weaknesses of their options and using that information to establish a goal for yourself in the negotiation, thinking about what issues I should put on the table based on what are my objectives, and making sure that I do the analysis of what are the critical issues to me. Having that all thought through before you start, I think is critical. And I think too often people become very comfortable with it, and then they stop being as well prepared.
I also think that in that particular, I completely agree with you, when it's your personal negotiation, letting emotions come in, it can cloud you in the moment. So I always think of like the first time I asked for a raise or a promotion, and like I was really nervous, and like I couldn't remember all of the reasons, even though I knew them in my head, I couldn't articulate them.
So is it harder for you to negotiate for yourself than for your...
Absolutely. I actually hate negotiating for myself because I do it and someone pays me to do it, and I can kind of keep the personal stuff, the emotions out of it. But when I have to do it for myself, it's intensely personal, and it can cloud you. And that's why preparing, especially in those situations, is so key.
That's exactly what we find too, is people can negotiate on behalf of their companies really well. You know, when the book came out that Women Don't Ask, women would be very offended and they would say, I ask really well on behalf of my organization, right? Women negotiate fiercely on behalf of their companies, and goodness knows you don't want to be the 4th grade teacher between the working mom, right, with the kid that's not happy in school. We negotiate fiercely on behalf of our families. We negotiate fiercely on behalf of our organizations. We just tend not to negotiate for ourselves. And I think a big piece of that is a discomfort in doing it, as you were mentioning. But I also think that the preparation piece is critical in that aspect. Because even the very best of negotiators who would never go to a customer and say something like, our costs are going up, so we have to charge you more because our costs are rising and our risk is high. You would never go in and talk about yourself in that negotiation. They go in to negotiate for themselves, and they talk all about themselves. I had a CEO who was in Florida, and he was being asked to take a new role in New York. And he called me up. And I'm expressly telling this story because it is a guy example. So I think it's true that women have a problem with this, but so too do men. So he called me up and he said, Vicki, they want me to move to New York and take this CEO role, but they only want to give me a 2-year contract. I cannot move with a 2-year contract. My wife's going to have to give up her job. The kids are going to be out of school. We're going to be in big transition. I might not even be doing really well a year from now. I've got to have at least a 3 or 4 year contract. I cannot go in there and have a 2-year contract. And he said, so I need your assistance. And I said, well, what were you going to say? And he said, no, that is what I was going to say. And I said, oh, you do need my assistance, right? Because that is not what you should say. I said, you have to think about, why are they hiring you? Why do they want you to come in? They want you to come in and turn this business around. So you want to go in and talk about the 5-year plan for turning the business around, which includes the metrics over the 5 years, what that's going to look like, and a 5-year contract, all as a part of one discussion. You don't want to go in and just talk about your family and why you need a 2-year contract.
Question, there's one in the back of the room. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, here we go. Please identify yourself.
Hi, Renee Horn with USAA, and my question is for Victoria. Many of us have often heard that women tend to rely on promotion based on experience, or are typically promoted based on past experience and achievements, whereas men tend to be promoted based on potential. I'd like to hear from you in terms of what you think the right balance is in the discussion for those of us that are in a future situation where we have to negotiate a promotion or a form of progression as it relates to potential.
Renee, I think that's such a good question, and it's a part of why I say you shouldn't just be focused on negotiating salary. You should be thinking about asking for roles and being clear about the role that you want and the role that you're looking for. You can absolutely frame that around what you can do for the company in that role and why you have this set of skills that would be valuable to the company in this kind of role, and you want to understand how to move into that role and what the path is to that. I was once brought into a professional service firm who had done a survey of all of their senior managers. And they called me up and they were alarmed. And they said, Vicki, we've got a big problem. Our women are not ambitious. Our men are ambitious and our women are not ambitious. And I said, what do you mean they're not ambitious? And they said, we asked this question, where do you want to be in 5 years and where do you want to be in 10 years? And the men answer very directly, I want this role in this time period. And the women say things like, I want to be in a role that best meets the needs of the company, utilizing my skills. They're not ambitious. And I said, it's not that they're not ambitious, it's that they're not asking. And I think over and over, when I hear women talk about how they negotiate for themselves, what I hear are a lot of feeble offers. And I always say, don't be feeble, no feeble offers. Go in and talk specifically about the kind of position that you want, why your skills would help the company in that role, and talk specifically about it with a plan. Not that I want it tomorrow, but I want it over this period of time, and then have a discussion about that. Because I think that it's absolutely true that men get promoted based on potential. And that's not only true in leadership roles, that's true in the boardroom too. People always say, we don't have more women on boards because we need sitting CEOs on boards. And I often ask them, really? I looked at your board, and a lot of your men don't seem to be sitting CEOs. They want the woman to have achieved the role. They're willing to put the man on there because of the potential that they will. So I think there's a huge issue with that across levels.
Over here, looks like, no, what was it?
I want to talk about backfiring. I mean, everybody's saying you should be so uncomfortable in your ask, you should be squirming in your chair. But if you push forward some of what you just said, Vicki, about the fact and how women are perceived, I think we can all relate to the fact that there's that you're too big for your britches problem, right? Where if you ask too much or you do that, then somebody's going to say, well, you know what? She shouldn't have that job at all. Right. How do you deal with that?
Good question.
You want me to?
No, please go ahead.
I'm curious. We'll let them both answer it. Yeah.
So, it's a really great question. And I was actually on a panel the other day with someone who did some of the research that shows that there's this backlash. And the problem I have with it is that a lot of the research that's done on it actually is done with an ask around a single issue of salary. And so I argue that the way that the research is conducted shows an over amount of backlash, not because of men versus women, but because you're not asking very well. And so if we were to ask more effectively, making it about the company, giving options, having it be about multiple issues, then I think you would experience less backlash because you're looking more flexible in your approach for doing it. And I think sometimes women fear the backlash so much that they don't get up the confidence to ask. And so my advice would be that no is the starting point of negotiation. And that until I have hit no, I have not pushed hard enough. I often say, men see no as a window that they climb through to start, like game on, let's go. Women will tell me all the time, I tried to ask, but they said no. And they see that as the end point. And I think we have to start to see that as the beginning, not the end. And when we do that and we persist in conversation, looking flexible, having it be about multiple issues, I think we'll experience less backlash. I also do think that women strive for this popularity contest. And the challenge is sometimes we have to know that we will not necessarily be well liked, but we will be well respected. And that's a decision you have to make. And you make it all the time as leaders. You make leadership decisions all the time based on respect and doing the right thing. And I think sometimes when we're negotiating for ourselves, we seek out liking rather than respect.
Vijaya, what would you say about the possibility of backfiring?
So I'm going to do a do as I say, not as I do on this one. Because as a leader in my organization, I have more than 50% women on my team, which I'm really, really proud of. And I see this all the time, where women are afraid to come and ask, whereas men ask all the time. And so my advice is you want to be a squeaky wheel, not annoyingly squeaky, but you want to. You want to remind people that you're not going to take no for an answer. You're not going to sit there and wait to be promoted based on merit. You need to advocate for yourself, because if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it for you. And that comes for asking for more, but it also comes from pushing back when people are taking too much from you in terms of taking away from your work-life balance or whatever it is. You have to advocate for yourself. No one will do it for you.
I had a negotiation backfire a little bit once when I asked for a little bit more money, not much, and I got it, and I think I asked for a little more, and the person said, who shall remain nameless, because I was getting counteroffers, and so it was a little bit of a back and forth. Right. And he said, I can give you this, and then he said, but we could just keep going back and forth here until we both say, you know what, you can go work for the Singapore Times. I'll never forget that remark, and I didn't ask again. So anyway, clearly needed to talk to the both of you before that.
You just needed more issues in there, Lee. Just more issues.
I needed to not fear no, which is a great lesson to take from this. We're out of time. I wish we could have gotten to more questions, but we want to leave you wanting more, which is another rule of something, if not negotiating. Thanks so much to my wonderful panelists. Thanks so much, you guys. I'm going to stay up here and thank you so much.